Ever get completely sucked into a game then only for it to just sort of disappear? Well, that's what I'm going to deep dive in again. I'm going to be talking once again about Heroes and Generals. However, the thought and the somewhat hints that there might be a comeback on the horizon. It shut down very, very recently. And of course, there was Heroes and Generals 2 and a potential spin-off in the works. But to cover that, we need to actually get some context about this game. It was this intense action first-person shooter with a whole strategic layer where you're commanding entire battalions. Like, you're planning these massive attacks and then you can jump straight into the trenches and fight alongside each other. It was kind of wild for the day, and it actually worked. They launched a really ambitious browser-based version back in 2011, and, you know, browser-based games back then weren't exactly known for being impressive, so it was a pretty deftly move back then for sure. They were using this game engine called Retox, which was pretty much everywhere with browser games, but it did have its limitations. So to overcome these, they had to be incredibly ambitious, and that ambition lasted for a little bit and definitely paid off. They hit Steam Early Access in 2014, got a huge number of players on it, and of course some YouTubers to, well, give that cash money out to. And it seemed like they were really onto something. Players loved how in-depth the strategy layer was, all with different roles you could play, and that feeling of really contributing to this massive war effort that was all happening in real time online. But that early access, yep, there's always a but, came with a price. Of course, you know how it is. As Heroes and Generals got bigger, so did the pressure to, well, make money. Yep. What do you expect? So, what was it? Microtransactions. The dastardly microtransactions. On the surface, it seemed like they were only really affecting the strategic side of things. Like, if you want to speed up how fast your army gets resources, that sort of thing with the strategy modes. Yet, as people started to delve into it, I think players were kind of like, okay, it seems like it's now directly affecting combat, and if this is going to keep going, more updates need to keep coming out. Yet I don't want to carry on paying for bits behind paywalls. So this is where Heroes and Generals started to really change. People started to notice that instead of focus on gameplay, it became more about, well, getting money. The updates started to feel just geared towards that instead of fixing the things that players actually cared about. For an example, they had an update where they changed the entire gunplay, you know, one of the most important parts of a World War II FPS, and now suddenly headshots were just way too powerful. And then they added three-way battles with Russia and Germany and the US, and it made everything super chaotic. It didn't really add anything to the strategic depth. It was just a mess. And this wasn't a great look for the developers. It seemed like they'd really messed up with how they were treating the community who actually still played the game. It had come down off its huge launch, and of course all the YouTubers talking about it. So they needed to keep people there, but they really weren't. On top of that, piling a lack of important updates and, well, more and more microtransactions. And, well, what happened? Players started to notice. It wasn't even just the change themselves. It was this feeling that developers weren't listening. Like they cared more about cash rather than the players who got them this far. And, well, once you lose your reputation, it's really hard to come back from that sort of thing. Me personally, I played a lot of Heroes and Generals on its release in 2014, all the way up to about 2016 and 17. And then as the player base started to die off, that was kind of where I dropped out of it as well. I mean, now we have replacements like Enlisted and that sort of thing, but Heroes and Generals did last for quite some time. Especially in this gaming landscape, it was pretty impressive how long it did, but the momentum just vanished. So that's where we're at with Heroes and Generals. A bit of a mess, and, well, it shut down eventually. People were not too happy about that. So then they announced a sequel a year or so ago, Heroes and Generals 2, the good old sequels, you know, you've got to love it. Now it's powered by Unreal Engine 5, a hot new thing, which everybody seems to be jumping on at the moment. It looks great, it runs fantastically, and it gives so much more options for visuals and, well, mechanics. And also it makes it a little bit easier for developers to create more ambitious projects. This was not bad on paper, right? Except they decided to fund this super ambitious sequel through a Kickstarter. And oh boy, not just any Kickstarter, we're talking a $2 million goal. From the same studio that, you know, we were just complaining about charged too much for microtransactions in their previous game, they were now asking their community they'd already sucked dry for more money. Players continued to feel ignored, and now they were asking them to fund a solution to the problems that they created themselves. Yeah, not a good look. And to top it off, they released a trailer for this Kickstarter. It did not impress, to put it lightly. I've made a couple of videos on this, and I admittedly have torn it apart and maybe been a little bit mean. But if you're asking for money, at least make something that requires people to want to donate to it, because that's essentially what you're doing at the end of the day. The graphics looks like they were from, well, years and years ago. The gameplay still looks clunky. I mean, this is Unreal Engine 5, and it just looked awful. And, well, more importantly, it looked fake. Not necessarily saying it was, but it just really didn't look like this was a game that was in any good state at this point in time. Everything just felt a little bit out of touch, especially the developers. It was like they were promising a huge sequel, but showing something from a decade ago, or at least before even Heroes and Generals was around. And you could just tell they missed the mark. Players started to feel more disconnected, and when you want people to be excited, the proof showed that the community wasn't. They barely scraped by with a fraction of that $2 million. It's a classic example of what happens when you break the trust over a long period of time. You alienate your players, ignore their feedback, then expect them to fund your next project. But instead of owning up to it, well, what did they do? Okay, well, Heroes and Generals 2 didn't reach its Kickstarter, so it was taken off Kickstarter. The Kickstarter was essentially cancelled. You can actually still go and look at that Kickstarter to this day, but the last post was saying that they are cancelling the Kickstarter. And what did they do? Well, they kind of blamed the criticism, which is absolutely baffling. And admittedly, maybe I'm a bit more defensive because I definitely know they watched my videos on it. And they blamed people criticizing their Kickstarter for why it failed. But that's just a catch-22, because why would people criticize it if it was actually something that people wanted in the first place? The actual criticism was from the decade of, well, alienating your own audience, for releasing a Kickstarter, asking for money for a game that didn't look very good, and also was subsequently killing off the previous game you made. That's why it didn't do very well. The YouTube videos were just a side effect of that, pointing fingers at everybody but themselves. So what's actually happening? Well, they are saying that it's not technically over. There's at least hints around that it might be coming back. They do say on the Kickstarter itself that they are looking for investors as well. They said specifically, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. We did not hit our Kickstarter goal. We have high hopes that Heroes and Generals 2 will live on, though. We're in talks with several gaming publishers and other studios, but have no update at this given time." So that's essentially what they're saying. I don't think it's completely done. I think we will probably see Heroes and Generals 2 again, because they want to release it. And do I think it's necessarily a bad thing? Not particularly. I'd love to see another game. I'd love to see H&G 2, especially since they've killed off the first one now. There is definitely a market for more first-person World War II games, but within the Hell Let Loose's and Squad 44s and the Enlisteds that didn't exist back when H&G 1 released, they now need to do something really special. I need to make sure that they are providing something other than just a free-to-play World War II shooter, because, well, people have got that covered now. They got acquired by another company, and that's where the original Heroes and Generals actually ended up dying. Once the studio got bought out, after the whole sequel blew up in their faces, the original Heroes and Generals was basically like, look, we're not making any money from this anymore. Let's just close it down. And, well, that was probably one of the worst things they could do. Probably because they were expecting H&G 2 to actually do something pretty good. So there are other games out there that you can play at this point in time, but I did hint at the fact we might be getting some spin-offs. It might not be the same as Heroes and Generals, but we've got Enlisted, definitely. And of course, if you want more premium paid stuff, there's Squad 44, which is doing incredibly at the moment, and Hell Let Loose, which, whilst in a tricky patch, is still a fantastic title. There's also Beyond Heroes, which I wouldn't put too much credence into, but it's kind of a little hint at something to come. A post came up on Reddit saying that Beyond Heroes was going to be a new spin-off to Heroes and Generals made by fans. It's practically the same game, but this time they're going to try and make it for the community. There is a Discord with pretty much nothing on it. There's a few websites that are hinting towards the fact that it's still going, but I wouldn't hold too much hope out for it. But it is kind of beautiful that there are some people that are trying to bring back this community. However, I think most of the people that were fans of Heroes and Generals have commuted to other titles at this point in time. I'd love to see a comeback for Heroes and Generals 2. As much as I criticize the Kickstarter that they did release, that shouldn't be a sign for them to go away. There should be the resources and the skills for them to be able to come back in a way that actually benefits the community, that they can build it back up, rather than just, well, continuously blaming people that have nothing to do with the initial demise. But let me know what you think. Do you think Heroes and Generals could make a return, or do you think it's gone for good now? Do we have enough to tide us over? Leave a comment down below. But until then, I will see you in the next one.